Thanks, Guillem, for coming to this value creation in life sciences series. I really appreciate your time. So, to start with, why don't you give a short introduction to the audience? Thanks.
Sure. Hello, Saurabh. It's my pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And my name is Guillem Laporta. I'm partner at Ysios Capital, which is a venture capital fund based in Spain. We have offices in Barcelona and San Sebastian. The company has been operating since 2008, and we currently manage three funds. The latest one, we made a final closing in 2019, and so far we have invested in 9 companies. And regarding myself, like I said, I'm partner here at Ysios. I joined the firm in 2008, and before joining Ysios, I was an associate at Andera Partners in Paris, where I was exposed to several deals in the life science industry, both in Europe and United States. And by way of background, I have a background in biotechnology and finance. I'm a CFA charter holder.
Perfect, super. Thanks a lot, Guillem. So let's get into some of the interesting questions, which I think might help the audience as well. So let me start with the tacit knowledge, okay, which I call it tacit knowledge. So let me quickly define what is tacit knowledge. So if I ask you how you walk, it will be difficult for you to explain, very clearly, but you know how to walk very well, okay. Or if you how to ride a bicycle, for example, right? We know how to ride a bicycle, but it's not that easy, to explain, and hence the tacit knowledge cannot be copied easily, actually. So now juxtaposing this argument, I wanted to understand from you, like, for example, for us, if I give you our example, when we value an asset, we understand that it's not about Excel modeling, rather building a narrative. Now that narrative building is it's a tacit knowledge. Okay. So similarly, if I ask you, either you can talk about Ysios Capital, or you can talk about any other VC fund, or without naming, or whatever it is, whom you really think that, what is it in either Ysios Capital or any fund, and I leave this up to you, that their skills cannot be replicated?
Yeah, that's a great question, Saurabh. I think that in the life sciences industry, each venture capital fund specializes in different types of investments, be it because of the size of these investments or the specific focus on the technology or diseases indications that they invest in. But there's one unique thing that you cannot replicate, or it's very difficult to replicate, which is the human resources, the team that each of these funds have. We as individuals, we have unique characteristics, ways of thinking, different backgrounds, and this is what makes teams, right? And it's based on this particular background and knowledge of every person that integrates a team that you can make investment decisions. And these investment decisions will differ from fund to fund because of this unique expertise and knowledge and background that the people and the persons that integrate this team have, right? Because at any point in time, a fund can decide to invest in this or that, but the approach that you will apply into these investments will depend on the people, and that's very rarely replicable.
Correct. I agree with your point. My subsequent question would be that still, many of them successful funds have not been able to generate that return. I mean to say, we can talk about, of course, non-biotech funds as well, but in general, talking about biotech investment is hard, right? Because you are trying to invest at early stage where there are many things which are not under your control. So rather it's unknown unknowns, right? So given that, given these unknown unknowns, there should be something in capacity in that human resource that you talked about that would be very, very valuable to analyze that investment. Because if not, then and as you know, all VC funds, biotech funds are not successful. Actually, many of them have have closed in the past, for example, in US, in Europe as well. So the point is that even in human resources, there should be certain skills that you are. What skills do you actually consider very valuable? In terms when you're analyzing a deal, for example, it could be deal making skills, it could be anything, but there should be some skills that you think that are very, very valuable when you invest in early stage asset, right?
Yes, I think that, of course, when you analyze a deal, you need to be very technical when it comes to the science, namely, the mechanism of action of the drugs that you are looking at, the biology behind, and you need to rely on consultants that do have very unique expertise on that domain of the science that you are trying to analyze. So this needs to be covered. But of course, there are also some, let's say, soft skills which are very important to analyzing a deal and at the end of the day making it happen, right? And I would say that one of these is having a good nose. And having a good nose, I think it's a function of experience and having dealt with people and trying to understand from a handshake or a way to present an opportunity from a team that they are telling you the truth, that there are no hidden places, and that you can rely them in the future moving forward. And that's the nose, that's saying, yes, I can trust this team, and I do have a good feeling about this opportunity. Of course, this is on top of all the technical analysis which needs to be there. But I think what makes a good investor is, having this good nose. This is going to be successful, and I can trust this team.
Exactly. And I think, I was about to ask this question further, but given that you have talked about the right nose, I wanted to understand that in the past, without naming the company, have in your experience in investing, whether it is in Ysios current or earlier, any incident happened where you managed to invest, but then later you thought that, okay, your nose was not as effective in analyzing the team because the team cannot pull it off. Because let's say I interact with you 5 times, okay, but nevertheless, or let's say in the real world we have interacted 3 or 4 times, right, in the past. However, we have not worked together actually. So working together and understanding the capacity of the people is different than having just an interaction, for example. Now there could be many salespeople who can sell you very, very well, and I know in my real world I have seen some of the people who really impress you on your first interaction, but the later I found out that they cannot execute it. So how do you have that particular nose, or what are the characteristics you see to understand that the team can really pull it off? So 2 questions. One is, have you ever been in a situation where the team has not pulled it off? And second is that what are the characteristics you see to judge that team actually?
Yes, on the first question, I cannot think of one particular example, but yes, I can tell that sometimes you feel like in a particular area the team needs to be reinforced, and then you have to have a frank conversation with the ongoing team and be aligned on who to bring on board or to even switch positions between the company. And this happens from time to time because the company evolves during time and there are new skill sets that are needed, right? And then to the second question, I think that's particularly important because when we do our due diligence on deals, we try to minimize all the risks so that when you have invested, if something pops up, on the negative sense, you must have forecasted or previewed the possibility that this could have happened, right? So it's not something new. This could have happened. It could have gone the right way or wrong way, but it went the wrong way. And you had that knowledge that could eventually happen, right? And now, before the investment, you try to understand what these risks are and how they can be mitigated. And we try to mitigate them even before the investment or after the investment when we have identified these risk areas. And of course, one of these risk areas is the team. And so to minimize, the execution risk and the team risk, generally speaking, first of all, what we really take a look at and really consider is the interaction that we have with this team during the due diligence, how professional they are in answering questions, in being down to detail, and all these sort of things. So this can really give you confidence that they know what they are talking about, that they have resources available to answer your questions, or on the contrary, that this team may perhaps underperform in the future because they are not able to put together, a set of answers to the specific questions that you have. Then you can see that very easily, for instance, when you go to the virtual data rooms that this team has put together and the quality of the materials. This really tells you a lot about how this team works and how they present to the external world, right?
Okay.
And then last but not least, something that we usually do is, conduct reference checks on the individual team members. So we ask them to introduce us to people that they know, and then we speak with these people, and we try to understand, what's been their experience in working with this particular team member in the past, and this may lead to, further discussions, and then even introducing us to other people that the initial team member didn't introduce us to. And so we try to get the full picture of the individuals that compose that organization and how they interact with each other.
Excellent. So let me turn around the question actually. In your past experience, did you get into any situation where you decided not to invest because you felt that all the reasons that you gave, maybe because of one or two reasons, you found that the team may not pull it off. However, you were surprised to see that actually they went very well, because as you know, it's an evolutionary phase. So in order to compare, for example, I could compare to my benchmark. That is fine, but one way also to evolve is to see to compare sort of 2020 versus 2021 versus 2022, right? So that's an evolution that you see yourself, right? So the companies also might evolve, the team might also evolve. So has there been any such situation, any surprises?
Yes, there have been, but I won't tell you names.
Of course,
but of course, I mean, like I was saying in the beginning, team is one of the elements that you consider, and it can be, a risk, and it can lead to good or bad surprises, as is the case for all the other elements of an investment. I was mentioning before the science, but there are many others, right? For instance, the possibility that the company may need further resources to develop their program, and you may not be able to find them at a certain point in time. So you need to put together a large syndicate, and that's not always the case. That's a risk factor, and so many others. So the team is just one piece, a very fundamental one, but it's just another piece of these risk factors. And it has happened, and during our due diligence, we found that the team may be a problem in the future, and we have decided not to invest in the company for this single reason.
Right. Got it. No, perfect. No, that gives a sense. Of course, we all, as we discussed, it's a complex investment, and of course, it has several pieces put together, and sometimes it's not easy to see all the picture at once. So now let's move to scale. Okay, scaling the company, and I have also discussed in the past, and even talked with other investors also about the scaling. Okay, one question I'll have is that how do you, so in comparison to tech companies, which are considered to be more scalable, right? You could have more subscribers and so on, and more connectivity, and then that leads to scaling, for example. Whereas in biotech companies, that's not the case. And to add insult to injury, we have a lot of regulatory challenges that the companies have to face, right? So when you invest in a company, how do you visualize that scaling factor? And that scaling factor also gives you the return, actually, right?
Yes, I think that when we think about the biotech industry and more specifically about startups, the way we think of a scale is not so much, producing from 10 to 100 and 100 to 1000, is rather the company being able to execute optimally during the different stages of development. And clearly there are three main stages of development for a biotech company. One is the preclinical stage, then the clinical stage, and then the commercial stage. Of course, you may find some other steps in between, but these are the three most fundamental ones. And so, going from preclinical to clinical, that's, one increase in scale, if you will, that needs to happen. And for that, you need, and we have talked about this before, Saurabh, is the team, right? The right team. And not necessarily the team that you have for a preclinical company is going to be the same, or the skill set of this team is going to be the same, for the clinical stages. Because in the clinic, you need to do many more and much more complex operations, and to a greater scale than those that are required for the preclinical stages. And hence you need people that have done that in the past, that know how to interact with the stakeholders, and that do have, an idea on how to develop a product clinically, what type of clinical trials you need to do, in what specific indication, from a regulatory point of view, what primary endpoint to select, what not, what will be the inclusion criteria of the trials, what is going to be the CRO that you are going to select to execute these trials, etc., which is, a bit far from, discovering a target or, other activities that you do when you are in the preclinical stages. So that's one step that increases the scale of the company. And then finally, if the product is successful in clinical studies, in clinical trials, and it gets approved, then the company needs to think about how to commercialize that product. And that's yet another scale and different skill sets that the company needs to bring on board, right? So that's the way we think about scale. And, besides the team and the right skill set, there's another fundamental element that comes into play, which is money, which is how are you going to finance this increase in scale along or throughout the development path. And what's very important here is for the company to choose the right syndicate, because of course the money needed or the funds needed to develop a compound preclinically are not the same as what you will need to develop it clinically, and even more so to bring the product to market. And so you need to think of a syndicate of investors that will allow you to have access to the increasing funds that the company will need. And perhaps some of these companies will eventually get listed in a quoted exchange. And so that will be yet another way to finance these increased activities. So all of these go hand in hand.
Excellent answer. So when you talked about commercial, and this is just a small question on commercial side. So when do you think is the right time for the biotech company who thinks that they should commercialize themselves, let's say in orphan, to incorporate the team adept at commercializing capabilities? Because I have heard conflicting point of view, which of course, as you know, in the real world, there is nothing 0 or 1, and there is always a gray area. So because my point is that, you could have a guy from, let's say, a big pharmaceutical company with strong commercial capability, but maybe if you hire him early, then he could be the wrong fit at the wrong time. So when do you think is the right time when the company should really think? Because there is an argument that waiting once your product is approved by FDA after phase 3 and all that is kind of too late. It has to start slightly beginning. So what's your opinion on that?
Well, I think there are many ways to answer this question. I would say that the company always needs to think commercially. I mean, even if the company is in very early stages in the preclinical phase. Why? Because they need to be able to explain what their differentiation point is. They need to say, look, there is this other product in the market, and we differentiate versus this one because of this and that. And in the same way, they need to identify which are the competitors which are not yet in the market but are being developed in the clinic,
right,
and why they are different. So they need to have a sense of how they are going to compete eventually against these other products if they ever reach the commercial stage, right? And this needs to be in the mindset of the teams from very early on in the development path of a drug. Now, of course, you are not going to hire a full commercial team when you are in a preclinical stage. That wouldn't make any sense. You need to deploy your resources where they are most needed in each step of this development. Right. But I would say from experience that a good time to try to incorporate people to think about how to launch the product and how to start marketing activities would be just before starting phase 3, for instance, because the type of investors and stakeholders that you will be interacting from that point onward will be interested in that. They will ask questions around, okay, what regions are you going to go after when you launch the product? When is it? In what regions is your product going to be approved first? How are you going to deploy your sales reps among the territory, et cetera, how are you going to convince payers to pay for that? In what tier in the payment schedule will your product be placed? And to answer these questions, you need a team that is, used to do these things. And the earlier you bring them on board, the better.
Perfect, super. And then my last question on investing is, at what stage of the biotech investing, right? Do you consider an angel investing, let's say, a more effective tool than venture investing? Of course, in case of therapeutics, of course, there is a huge problem of dilution as well, because business angels cannot participate in the future once you guys kick in, right? So, but nevertheless, in overall, do you see that there is any room for any kind of fin to fill the gap, where those guys can make a return before you guys pitch in?
Yes, I mean, angel investors, of course, invest before we do. Venture capitals do. Typically in rounds below 5 million or so, 2 million, less than 2 million. And of course, they have other incentives and different, investment timelines compared to ours. So sometimes they can just exit when a new venture capital steps in with a larger round and they sell their shares, or they can decide to preserve their shares in the company, assume some dilution, but still be part of the value creation that will take place. That's a world, the angel world, that I don't really know about, because I'm not an angel investor myself, but I can understand their way of thinking, right? And the different avenues that they have to maximize profit, which is different to how venture capitalists think, or the way we project the investments.
Perfect, super. So thanks a lot again, Guillem, for your time. I really appreciate, and we had a very interesting conversation, and I hope audience will find it useful. Thank you very much, Guillem.
Thank you, Saurabh. My pleasure.